This is our Communication Access Connect, Tuesday, April 16th. And Tim and I and DVU people and William and Nina are excited to have you here today to talk about well, let's say April's been a big social justice kind of policy changing advocacy kind of month for DVU. So along that theme, although I'd like to say we planned it that way, but we didn't. We have our guest speaker that we're going to have today. But before we start with that, I'll just introduce myself, and then I wanted to, well, let's start with introducing the group, and then I'll tell you what I wanted to tell you. So anyway, so I'm Darlene Hansen. I'm a trainer, Self-Advocate Speakers Bureau trainer person for DVU, and help and host the Communication Access Connect. I'll throw it to you, Nina.
Hi, everybody. Good to see some of you again. My name is Nina Spiegelman. I'm the policy director for DVU, and communication access is like one of our super important priorities. So happy to be here and very psyched about our speaker today. Okay, next up, Tim.
My name is Tim Jin, and I am the director of the empowerment programs. William, you're it.
Hello. My name is William Del Rosario, and I am an intern with DVU. Supporting me today is my mom, Michelle. Thank you for being here today.
Thanks, William. And then we have Eric, and he's behind the scenes. Is this your first CAC or second? I think it's your first one. Hi, Eric. So I don't know if Eric's coming on screen here.
Yes, it is my first
good.
communication access connect. I'm behind the scenes doing all the tech stuff for Zoom. I'm a program assistant here at DVU, so I'll be helping Tim's team as well as Darlene's team. I'm glad to be here.
Thanks. Thank you, Eric. What we need you guys to remember to do is at the bottom of your screen, you're going to see that little world button. English people, don't forget to press it and choose English. Spanish speaking people, you've probably done this already, but choose the Spanish speaking globe so that you can receive the simultaneous interpretation. Lorna, do you want to come on and say that in Spanish for me, or is it good? I think we might be good. Okay, we're good. All right. Okay, so here's what we're going to get started with today. I wanted to share, just to take a second here to acknowledge a passing that we had of a really important person in many of our lives here at DVU, and I know many of you guys out there who are living with autism or especially communication differences. And so I'm going to share, I don't know if you don't know her, then you can see the picture of her so that you will know the face. So on Good Friday, Dr. Ann Donnellan passed away in Woodland Hill. No, what was it? Westlake Village. That's where she lived. And Dr. Ann Donnellan was instrumental in the world of autism, especially in the state of California. She was passionate about making sure people were treated well, treated with respect, spent a lot of time working on whether or not you think it's a good thing or not, getting the laws passed about functional behavior analysis, because people were being manhandled and abused, sometimes killed because of poor practice. And Anne and other people worked really diligently to let everybody know that is not okay. In my life, she taught me about facilitated communication in 1991. And many of you guys here in the group who use some sort of supported typing may probably already know that her work and the work of Rosemary Crossley and Doug Bicklin, and that was really instrumental in getting things started. And then we've got RPM and we got S2C, and it kind of everything happened at the right time. So anyways, she's a good friend. I miss her terribly. And her words of wisdom are just amazing. She is someone who brought to us the concept of presuming competence. And so when you think about presuming competence, if you know why you think about it, it's because of Ann Donnellan. Doug Bicklin as well, but I think that Ann even got more credit for it because that was a big theme. And one big deal thing, if she's doing a presentation, she would make everybody in the audience say, we have to continue to be learners because you have to be comfortable saying, I don't know. If you don't know the answer, you got to say, I don't know. Don't make it up. Don't go the other way. Just say, I got to know. I got to figure it out. And that's a work ethic that she taught me for sure. So I want to take some minutes to talk about Ann. But moving on now today to some more disability rights. See, this is a big theme. This is the month of disability rights. Today, our guest speaker, I'm excited to have him, is Will Leiner, and he is from Disability Rights California. And Will is now appointed, one of the members, a number of us here, not me, but other people in the group are also appointed to the master plan group. I think now I lost the words for it, Will, I'm sorry. Master plan, he'll tell us more about it, group that the state has put together, and Will's a part of that. But I'm excited because Will's my go-to guy at DRC because you just get it. So I'm going to let you take it from there, Will. Tell us more about you. Master Plan for Developmental Services. Thank you, Will. Let's put it on Will Leiner. We have two Wills, so Will Leiner now. There we go. Perfect. Take it away, Will.
Thanks, Darlene, for that introduction. And I have a slide deck. Give me a moment to share my screen and get that all set up. And then I will start.
Cool.
Right, there it is. I think it's up, but can someone give me a thumbs up or say, okay, say
Yes, it
thumbs
is.
up. Thank you. And let me open up my chat so I can make sure I'm following along. Great. Now the screen looks how I want it to look. So thank you, Darlene, for that introduction. And it's really good to be back at a Communication Access Connect. It's been some time, too long, since I've joined one of your meetings. So my name is Will Leiner. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a managing attorney here at Disability Rights California. And I've been at DRC for, I keep saying 15 years, but I've been saying 15 years for a long time. It might be 16, it might be, I've been here for a while. And throughout my career, I've been involved in supporting people through individual advocacy to help them live their chosen way of life. I've, in representing people and seeing the similar problems that they have with our systems over and over and over again. For a while, then I pivoted to doing more systemic level legal representation and class action work. And now I'm focusing a lot on policy advocacy and policy changes in our system. And I help to support a team of attorneys and advocates. We have a community organizer and a policy analyst, where I'd like to say there are too many needs out there and too many ways that we need to go about changing the system. So we need all the tools. So my team works at the intersection of individual advocacy, policy advocacy, direct legal representation, and what I think is more the big cases that impact litigation to make people's lives better. So I really appreciate being here today. And I was asked to speak for about 15 or 20 minutes, and I hope I can get this all in. But by the end of my talk today, I hope that you will all learn more about Disability Rights California and some of the work we do. I want to spend some time, this will be toward the end of the presentation, but talking about projects by the Department of Developmental Services the acronym is DDS, to standardize the individual program plan template and different data collection practices. And I really want to start the conversation about how communication access fits into these DDS projects. Let me start with a quick overview of Disability Rights California. So we were founded in 1978. That's, by my count, about 45 years ago, plus or minus a couple of years. And we are a statewide nonprofit legal services agency. But legal services agency is kind of a misnomer because we do more than just legal services. We use advocacy, we do client representation, investigation, public policy. Like I said in my introduction, kind of all the tools to better the lives of disabled Californians. And our mission is to defend, advance, and strengthen the rights and opportunities of people with disabilities. So I'm going to do a really short history lesson. Like, we've been around for 45 years. Why are we here? What do we do? Well, we are what's known as California's Protection and Advocacy Agency. And although DRC, I think we were created in, what I say, 1978, the very first protection and advocacy program in the country was created in 1975 after a series of television reports exposed what I could only call inhumane and horrible warehousing of disabled people at an institution in New York called Willowbrook. And it was exposed through the investigative journalism of, some of you might be surprised, some of you know this, some of you might be surprised to hear, it was a Fox News personality. The one with the mustache, maybe you have to be old enough to know him, but Geraldo Rivera. And before he was at Fox News doing his thing, he was out there doing on-the-ground investigations and here doing some really incredible journalism about the abuses that were taking place at Willowbrook. And that investigation and journalism, when it was exposed and people could see the conditions there, well, and that's outrage. And there was enough outrage that led to congressional action. And that's what led to creation of a law that we call the PAD Act. There are lots of acronyms, so it's PADD. And that stands for Protection and Advocacy for People with Developmental Disabilities. And this legislation, the PAD Act, required every state and territory to have a protection and advocacy system to make sure that what happened at Willowbrook doesn't happen again. And Disability Rights California is that protection and advocacy system for California. I wish I could say what happened at Willowbrook never ever happened again or will happen again. It's the unfortunate reality of what it means to have institutions, but we're out there, and part of what we do is to watchdog and expose horrible conditions for what they are. And I'm going to pause for a second. I see a couple of comments asking for the slides. I believe Eric has a copy, but also, if you let me pause for a second, I can drop a copy of the slide deck into the chat too, if that could help.
That's okay. If Eric has it, we'll get it in there eventually tonight. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. So we really started, 45 years ago with a focus on the conditions of people in institutions. But since that time, we've expanded to not just include advocacy for people with developmental disabilities, but we also have programs that support advocacy for people with mental health disabilities, for people who have a disability under the Americans with Disabilities Act, people with traumatic brain injury, people who use assistive technology, and people who are beneficiaries of Social Security. So there are a lot of other programs that have come into place that fund our work since the creation of our developmental disabilities program all that time ago. I've been talking about our federal programs, but we also have a number of programs that receive funding from the state of California. I think many of you are aware of our Office of Clients' Rights Advocacy. That's our program where we have a contract with the Department of Developmental Services to provide advocacy to people who are served by regional centers. So it's structured in a way, I think many of you are familiar with this, but we have 21 regional centers, and each regional center has an assigned clients' rights advocate and an assistant clients' rights advocate. And they provide advocacy supports. The threshold question is someone trying to get eligible for regional center services, or are they eligible? And once you get over that threshold question, then the advocacy can be around helping people secure their regional center services, helping people secure services from other sources like in-home supported services or special education, or other programs as well. So it's a really big scope, a really big mandate that our clients' rights advocates have about how to support people. But with the contracts being for one clients' rights advocate and one assistant clients' rights advocate, I spent some of my career in that program at the Office of Clients' Rights Advocacy, and there's typically a lot more need out there than there are advocates that can help. We also have what's called our Client Assistance Program. These are folks where we have a contract with the Department of Rehabilitation, and it's to provide advocacy support and services for matters related to the Department of Rehabilitation and independent living centers. We also have a contract with the State Department of Hospitals to provide advocacy services specifically to people with mental health disabilities who live in state-operated institutions. There are other federal programs, there are other state programs, but when people think about DRC, from the outside, people look at like we're one agency, right? But from the inside, like it's really what I think of as an umbrella agency that has a lot of different programs and contracts to do different type of work for our community. But at a very high level, when it comes to who we help in our system, it's pretty easy, right? It's all disabled Californians are eligible to receive assistance from Disability Rights California. Now, does that mean everyone can get the same type of assistance? Oh, no, it doesn't. So I want to talk a little bit about the type of help that Disability Rights California typically provides. Those of you who have contacted our intake line or OCRA, you might see that and know that we do a lot of work, what I think of as our traditional legal services type programs. So people are calling with questions about their rights. It could be about regional center services. It could be about IHSS. They have a question about information they received, and like does this make sense? This doesn't make sense to me. Are my rights being violated? So we have a large number of staff that handle what I think of as the people are calling with questions about their rights, questions about our systems, and we provide a lot of consultation and advice to people with disabilities and their family who have different legal questions. We also have a unit whose job is to investigate complaints about abuse and neglect in programs and facilities. And as part of that, we have teams that also, don't do like, even if it's not an official abuse and neglect investigation, they're out there kind of boots on the ground at facilities, monitoring where people are and making sure that they're receiving appropriate services. We do a lot of outreach and education, kind of like what I'm doing today. People have questions about their rights. They have questions about what's happening in their systems. So we are out there doing trainings for self-advocacy. We are out there doing trainings about know your rights. So we're also out there in the community doing that work. a lot of what we do, we have a lot of attorneys that work for Disability Rights California. So we provide legal representation to people with disabilities, and that can range anywhere from being someone's attorney in an IPP meeting to joining them and representing them at a fair hearing, all the way up to what I think of as like big systems reform litigation, like we call that class action litigation, where you have kind of a handful of people representing an entire group of people, where the changes that we're able to get hopefully impact an entire group of people and not just the one or two people who are filing the lawsuit. And more, DRC has been doing policy and other types of systemic reform advocacy to improve the lives of disabled people. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in an upcoming slide, but this is a lot of our policy just directly with DDS, directly in the legislature, trying to get changes to laws and policies to improve our systems. Oops. We have a lot of different practice areas too. I spoke earlier about DRC's role to safeguard and protect the well-being of people that live in institutions. And that's still a major focus of our work. But over the years, our work has really expanded to including protecting the rights of people with all types of disabilities, whether they live in their own home, in a group home, or in an institutional setting. And today our practice areas include things like helping people access their Medi-Cal services, helping people access in-home supported services. My whole practice group, one of the primary things that we do is helping people access and fight for regional center services. We have teams that focus on access to education, and in particular, special education services. Department of Rehabilitation Services. I saw someone in the chat say voting. Yeah, that's right. There's Ryan. Good call out to voting. We have a whole team whose job it is to expand voting access and protect voting access for disabled people. So they're doing really important work in that team. We are looking at housing. We are focusing on conditions that people face in carceral settings like institutions or prisons or jails. We have a team that looks at disability discrimination. And then one of my favorite practice areas, which I think kind of also transcends all of them, is our Olmstead and community integration work as well. That's the work I started doing at Disability Rights California and kind of carry with me throughout the rest of our work too. So the right that people have to live, work, and play in communities of their choice. A little bit about our public policy advocacy. I could spend 20 to 30 minutes on this topic alone. We do a lot of it. You notice that the title slide, I say that this is our public policy advocacy that's specific to regional centers. So DRC is a big place. We do a lot of work. I'm going to focus a little bit about some of our work specific to regional centers. And again, this could be a whole 10 slides, but I'll try to get through it. This year, we have a couple of legislative priorities. I'm going to call this our legislative advocacy. And we are co-sponsoring 2 bills this year in this space. And by co-sponsoring, I mean we are driving the efforts to make sure that these bills, fingers crossed, work their way and pass through the legislature and, fingers crossed, get signed by the governor. One of our most important bills this year, the title is AB 1876, that refers to the bill number, AB that refers to the House of Origin, the Assembly. And it's about keeping the option for all of you to request your IPP meetings by Zoom or by Teams or by phone, to request them remotely when you want to have your IPP meetings done remotely. This was something that was put into law during the early stages of the pandemic. in 2020. When it was put into law, the legislature and DDS put a sunset date on it. And a sunset date means that if nothing happens, then that option will go away. So right now, the current law says that on June 30th, 2024, the option for people to have their IPP meetings by Zoom, it could go away if we don't act, if we don't make sure that that option remains in place. So this is a really important bill, and I see that one of my colleagues at DRC is working on this bill. Vivian is also here, and Vivian, I'm glad you're here. And if you have information that you can share out that I can't fit in the chat about our bill so that people know about it, I think that people might appreciate information about AB 1876. Another bill that we're co-sponsoring, it's SB 1197. It was a typo. I put in 1977 into the presentation, so I'll make sure that gets updated. But it's a bill about respite. I think many of you might be familiar with respite services, so services that caregivers and families can get just when they need a break from providing care and support to their loved ones with disabilities. And it's a common system that many people have access to, but because of the way the laws are written about respite, there are certain categories of caregivers for kids in foster care who can't access the service from their regional center. And it depends on whether they're a relative or a non-relative. And for some reason, the regional centers are interpreting the law to say that non-relative caregivers, they're not eligible to get respite, even though they're doing the same type of work, providing the same type of support. Because they're not able to get this service, it's pitting those foster placements at risk. It's deeply inequitable. I often don't like saying like it's not fair, because I feel like that's something I tell my kids, like life isn't fair, but like this really isn't fair, and it's something that we're trying to do to change the bill, change the law, and get that fixed so that more people have access to respite services who need it. We are very involved in the state budget process, and we are part of initiatives to expand access to social recreation services. There are a lot of people out there that have been having difficulties accessing that services. We see regional centers pitting what I think of are arbitrary restrictions on these services. We used to see regional centers say, well, if you want social rec services like being able to attend your local gym or swimming lessons, well, you need to give up another service to get them, like respite. Or they would say, you need to, like, if you want to pay for this, we'll pay up to $100, but you'll have to pay the rest. We've seen other policies that say social recreation services, they're important, but they're not something that the regional center will ordinarily fund. So we're seeing, ever since these services were restored, more and more restrictions being put on this service. And like, no, we need to make it easier to get this. It's really important to people. Services that allow them to be and feel included in their communities, services that give people joy. We need to do more to get people access to these services. So we're trying to work on changing the law to make it easier, not harder, for people to get social recreation. We are part of coalitions to fight against delays to rate increases. And we also do a lot of administrative advocacy. And some of you are on this call who are part of the Developmental Services Master Plan. So it's about being part of DDS stakeholder groups or other committees, or just advocacy with DDS directly to talk to them about how we make our systems better. A little bit about our legal advocacy. Just a quick snapshot of some of our current and recent court cases. We have been involved in court cases to help make sure that people who participate in the self-determination program can get rental assistance from their regional centers. There are many regional centers and even DDS who used to say people who live on their own with a service called supported living can get rental subsidies when they need it for their health and safety. That's a service under the Management Act. But people in self-determination, they don't get that. And we said, that's not right. You can't exclude people from getting this really significant benefit like rental assistance if they're in self-determination. So we did a court case on that. And now you'll see information on DDS's website about self-determination, where it now says, yes, people who are in self-determination are also entitled to funding for rental assistance. That case is over. The next case that I'm going to talk about, this is a case that's ongoing and current. We are representing a client. Their name is Padres Buscando El Cambio. They're an organization out of Harbor Regional Center, and they represent people, Latino and Latinx people who receive regional center services. And it's a race discrimination lawsuit. And they are challenging Harbor Regional Center and TDS. They're saying, we don't have equal access to the services we want and need. When we look at the data, we see that people who are white get a lot more than we do, and that's not right. So they're currently suing Harbor Regional Center and TDS on some of those issues, and DRC is representing them. And then the third example, this is a case I think I spoke about some time ago. There's a class action case that is now in the middle of settlement. That means that we filed a lawsuit and we came to an agreement with the other side, and now that agreement is being implemented. This was a case to make sure that deaf people who have intellectual and developmental disabilities, to make sure they can access their regional center services and effectively communicate with their regional centers and providers. So we were seeing there were people who are deaf that were essentially living in a state of isolation in their group homes or in their day programs because they had no access to communication to be able to communicate with their staff, with their peers, to be able to talk about what they need and want in their IPP meetings. I would imagine that folks on this call may see some parallels to the things that are going on in our system today when we think about communication access more broadly. I encourage all of you to kind of look at the link to the website on this case, and also just to think through like how might some of the things about that we're learning about in this case apply to people who have communication access needs. I'd love to come back and talk more about where things are with this lawsuit and the settlement, because I think there are a lot of lessons that are applicable to all of you. I know that's been a lot. I was asked to talk a little bit about getting help from DRC. And what you see on this slide is a screenshot of our website. It's our Get Help page. And the hyperlink is on the very bottom. And you'll see that there's a phone number to contact DRC for assistance, as well as a form that people can fill out with the type of assistance that they're seeking. It looks easy, right? It looks easy, but I'm also going to be kind of honest. Disability Rights California are kind of a complicated place. And even folks who work here sometimes struggle to figure things out when it comes to getting someone that needs help to the right person at DRC who can help them. And this is partly because we've divided our work by practice areas that tend to mirror the governmental systems that serve people, or we separate our practice areas by very specific legal issues. And, you know, people's lives don't really work that way. Most everyone needs an intersectional life and has intersectional needs. So it's not always easy to figure out how to get to the right person. When people contact DRC for help, one of the first people at DRC that you'll speak to is someone called an intake advocate. And you might want to like jump into your legal issue right away or why you want help. You might not be able to tell your entire story right away. And this is because the intake advocate will figure out, like, are you eligible for DRC services? And there may be some type of information they need to collect from you to open up what we call a service request in our system. So, I just trying to also set some like what it's like to contact DRC for help. I think that we have some work to do to make the process easier and more accessible. But I think it's also important for people to understand also like what it's like, what the experiences are like for like people who contact our intake unit. And, I'm gonna put my email in the chat after I'm done speaking. I'd love to hear from any of you who have experiences in contacting DRC for support or help, like the good or the bad. I'm very interested also in hearing what people's experiences are when they contact DRC. And then usually once someone tells their story, the intake advocate, sometimes they'll be able to provide basic information right away. Like, oh, I know it, like based on what you're saying, here's your option to file a complaint. Based on what you're saying, I suggest that you have an IPP meeting and talk to your regional center. So there are some things that they'll be able to say right away, depending on the issue. Sometimes they need a little time to research the question and get back to people. And then the advocate always sends information about the legal issue to DRC practice groups and sometimes multiple practice groups. So, for example, if your issue is specific to special education, we have a youth practice group that reviews all of those service requests. If the issue is about a regional center that refuses to fund a communication partner or a communication device, right, that'll probably go to my team, the Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities Practice Group. And we aren't able to take every case we see, not by a long shot. There's just too much need out there. But we do try to review every case that comes our way so that we can at least make sure that the intake advocate didn't miss anything. And frankly, seeing the cases also helps us identify trends that help support our broader systems advocacy. I do want to pivot away from DRC and talk about two really important DDS projects. So you may have all heard people talk about how there are 21 different regional centers and 21 different ways of doing things. This has been a great source of frustration to many people, including lawmakers. And last year, the legislature wrote a law that required regional centers to start doing more things in the same way. And I'm going to talk about two of those things, the IPP template project and the DDS data collection project, and how communication access fits into these things. So the IPP template project, there is going to be a DDS public meeting on April 25th, 2024. And at this meeting, DDS is going to share a draft of a standardized IPP template that all regional centers are supposed to start using next year. So standardized means like doing everything in the same way. And the IPP, well, that's the document that captures how you want to live your life, your goals, and what services the regional center will pay for to help you meet those goals. And we think this is a good thing, right? And I want to be clear, standardization doesn't mean that everyone's IPP will look the same, but it does mean that everyone will or should be asked the same types of questions. Because too often we see that certain people will get certain things because they know what to ask for or how to ask for it. Like they know the magic words to use. And we think that there are certain things that people shouldn't have to ask for it to be part of their IPP meetings or what goes in the IPP document. So take language access, for example, right? Regional centers now always ask someone about their preferred language. That's a good thing, right? Spoken and written language is how many people navigate the world around them. And when the regional center knows this information, it's more likely that people will get support with translation and interpretation and from providers with whom they can communicate. Right. And I spoke earlier about our deaf access lawsuit. And because of that lawsuit, people will soon be offered assessments at every IPP meeting to identify their current communication needs and communication potential, which will then ideally drive services for people who are deaf, right? They can decline these assessments if they want, but it's, again, one of those things people shouldn't have to ask for supports for things that we consider to be fundamental rights, like language, like communication, and the ability to be heard and understood. So bringing it back to the DDS public meeting that's going to take place in April, I think I'm going to attend. I'm encouraging everybody to attend. And for the purpose of this communication access call, I think there are things to think about. Like, are there things that regional centers should automatically ask about in IPP meetings that get recorded in the document? Like, I don't know, how does a person prefer to communicate? What are their current communication supports? Does the person have communication support needs that aren't being met? So you all may have a million more things that you might say, like, I wish that they would just ask these things in the IPP meeting for everybody, and it shouldn't be on the person to ask for them. And it may be bigger than just communication, right? But if you're interested in learning more about the IPP template, or you're interested in providing feedback, try to attend the DDS meeting. And before I exit the Zoom, I'll also put, oh good, I'm looking at the chat. Darlene, thank you for putting the registration link in the chat. I think this is going to be a really important thing in our system, and everybody has an opportunity to influence what that change is going to look like. And then I have one more slide. On a similar note, DDS is also standardizing certain types of data collection practices. And this is also really important because good data allows DDS to do things like identify trends in our services at a systems level to help figure out if there are gaps in what's funded or what's not funded. I'll give you an example. Like, if DDS is collecting information about the services that regional centers authorize versus whether the money on those services is actually spent, so the differences between what they say someone can get and what someone actually gets, well, that could be a pretty good indicator about, I don't know, if there's enough providers out there that are willing to fill that service need. Or maybe it will cost DDS to ask questions like, why are regional centers approving services that don't get used? Or maybe, collecting data around where people live currently versus where they want to live. Well, that could help regional centers and DDS figure out what kind of money are we investing in housing for people. And on the announcement, it's a picture of an announcement from DDS that you see on the slide. And right now, they're considering updates to information they collect about 5 categories: race, ethnicity, language, residence, and status codes. Status codes means like a status: is someone eligible for regional center services? Is their case inactive? Do they live in the community? Do they live in an institution? So they have these really obscure status codes. But like, what's missing, right? Communication access, maybe that seems important. So it's just another opportunity to ask about communication access, to say, what about us? and especially if you have ideas about what kinds of data and information about communication preferences or supports you think DDS should collect, right? And like, should DDS collect information about whether people use communication supports like AAC, similar to how they collect information about what language someone speaks? Should they collect data about how many people say they need additional supports with communication and what those supports might be? So like the IPP template, and thank you, Darlene, for putting a link in the chat. There's going to be a public meeting about this. It happens to be on the same day in the morning, so April 25th at 9 a.m. And I'll just close by, again, asking everyone to consider whether they can make these meetings or provide comment in another way, to just think at a broad level, what questions should DDS ask people? What questions should DDS or regional centers ask people about communication access during every IPP meeting? Or like, not even communication access, it could be anything, right? The types of things that people shouldn't have to ask. What data should DDS collect about communication access? So it's just things to consider. I'd like everyone to consider, before those meetings. And then I would love to figure out how we can partner on doing different types of public comments or public input together. I think it's always good to have large numbers of people at these meetings. I also think it's good to be able to work in coalition to show DDS and others that there are a lot of people thinking about the same things in perhaps the same way too. And that was last slide. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Will. Now we get to talk to you. Now we get to tell you all our ideas.
And I probably went over time. I apologize.
Oh, no, no worries. No worries at all. It was great information, and I think it was nice to see, kind of organize how DRC works in our world and how it can be helpful to us. Let's see, there's a lot of asking about the slides, so we got that part covered. Let's see where else. I'm looking for the other people's questions first. I think, are you on these, in terms of these events on April 25th, are you in those meetings, or are you two joining through the Zoom links?
I will be joining through the Zoom links, like as a member of the public representing DRC, but I'm not part of the meeting. I'm not on the committees. It's going to be DDS kind of running the show. And then we're all going to be there kind of joining from the public, listening in.
Okay. There was at the beginning people, Valerie was saying it's important that they continue to provide these Zoom platforms. It's so silly. It seems like common sense. But if you gotta have a bill about it, have a bill about it. So silly. So yes, stick with that one that you're doing. That's a good idea. There isn't enough, this is Amy saying this in Spanish. She said there isn't enough information about the master plan, and what little we know, it is for the purpose of taking away the privacy rights of our children. And that's a translation, so I don't know. Is that what the master plan's about, Will?
That is 100% not what the master plan is about.
Okay.
Taking the privacy rights away from people. I hope we get to a place where the people running the master plan, and I'm on the master plan working group, will be able to talk about what the master plan is, to be able to talk about the vision behind the master plan, so that people can understand what it is, what it means, and how it will impact their lives. I wouldn't be on this master plan if it was about taking people's privacy rights away. So I can also say that right now. And I know that California Health and Human Services, they want to start doing roundtables, like of the head agency that's in charge of the master plan. What they've said is, we want to listen to the people on the master plan. We also want to hear from the community. And they are looking for hosts. And I might suggest like maybe this Communication Access Connect call would be a good forum for people, all of you, to talk to the people in charge of the master plan, the state agencies, about what's important to you. I have heard the people that are running the master plan, for those of you who are familiar with the ICC and cafecitos, they're going to show up at a cafecito to talk to the community also about what the master plan is and what it means to people, and to hear from people about what they want. And an opportunity for people to say, I have concerns about my privacy. Should I be concerned about my privacy? So there's going to be many more meetings, a lot more opportunities for people to talk about the master plan, what their hopes are about it, what their fears are about it. But if this was a plan to just like take people's services away or invade their privacy, I would want no part of it.
Yeah.
And I hope it does not like lead to any of that.
Yeah, no. Go for it, Tim. Oops, sorry. You meant to not do that. Sorry about that. I want Will still in there.
I will. Besides the IDD community and people who are getting regional centers services, who else do you help? For instance, let's say that my friend who is disabled, but not getting any kind of services from DDS, and they are getting discrete from their employer based on their disability. Can they call DRC and get help? Because our community is only a subgroup to the total number who are disabled.
Tim, that's a really good question. So DRC is much bigger than the work of my practice group. You know, we specialize in regional center services. We have whole teams that are focused on things like discrimination in housing. I think we have some folks that also work on discrimination in employment, right? So we have folks that help people get some employment supports, and if they get it and they get a job and their employer discriminates against them, we have folks that may be able to help with those issues too. So the question is, does someone have a disability, right? That's what gets their foot in the door for our services. And, you know, we don't help with every single legal issue under the sun, but there's many more things that we help with than we don't help with.
Cool. Let's see. Okay, William the Rosario, keep talking about the Zoom, which is a good idea. But Yum said, will the chat be open for these meetings so AAC users can give their comments, meaning the April 25th meetings?
I encourage, so yeah, I don't know, right? I don't run the master plan meetings, but we're in, you know, we're in communication with the people that do. And I would suggest, and before I leave, I will drop a chat and the link to the email address that people can use to provide feedback about what they want to see out of the master plan. And I think giving feedback that for people who have communication access needs and use AAC, opening the chat up means the meeting is more accessible for them. I think that you should give the master plan folks that feedback. I'm happy to pass it along as well, but I do think it's much more powerful if it comes from AAC users too.
Mm-hmm. Nina?
Hi, Will, thank you so much. That was all so great. I have like a bazillion questions, but can I ask, this is like, I have to jump on this opportunity to ask something so basic, but I think I'm not the only one with this question. And that is, this is super basic, so forgive me. If we've got an issue, a regional center services issue of some sort, it may have many parts. How do we know, where do we turn to? How do we know the difference between going to DRC or a client's rights advocate? Like, and like, what do you recommend to get the fastest service?
Nina, that's a really good question. It should be a simple question with a simple answer. Let me talk about like a little bit about the differences that, as I see from my perch, between OCRA and between like the work that my team does. So with OCRA, I think of them as more like generalists. They know their regional center really well. They do a high volume of cases, and they do it, they represent people in matters around regional center services, IHSS, like special education, Medi-Cal. So they do a lot, and there's some clients' rights advocates that also are working in regional centers that have 40,000 people. So they're going to be doing more of the, this is probably on average, right? Like not, where I think we can think about how they work. A lot of individual consultations, a lot of kind of individual advice, not a lot of capacity to do like higher level representation, because they're kind of, they get a lot of calls, and there are a lot of people that need a lot of help. My team, conversely, we're more specialists. So most of the work that we do, it's around people who receive regional center services. But we tend to do like systems level work, right? So I gave an example of 3 cases earlier in my presentation. One of those cases, the Patres Buscando Alcambia case, that case is heavily litigated. So it's one case right now, but it's taking up, I'd say the energy of 3 of my attorneys, right? So like that's their job right now, litigating that case. But I think that when your issues are more systemic in nature, like we may not be able to do that level of representation, but our eye is on trying to figure out, like when people are experiencing problems in the system, like social rep, for example, and we're seeing it coming up over and over and over again. Well, how can we fix our systems to make sure that like not just the person that called, but everybody can get access to these services? So it's not as easy as like, is there a right door between OCRA and kind of our federal programs? And it can't hurt to contact both. But if it's like one thing that our local clients' rights advocates have is relationships with their regional centers. So often they know like the right way to like solve a problem, right, that people are having. Where we might say, geez, you can't have a system where it takes like special access to somebody at a regional center to solve their problem. Because if you do it that way, then it just gets solved through one person and not everybody. So Nina, I know that was a really basic question, but there's no real easy answer about like what the right door is between OCRA and our federal programs when it comes to getting support. Right, but we do try to make sure that we get the cases that come in to the right people to be in the best place to solve their problems.
I mean, I'm glad there's more than one door, and and that you're not, you can try both. I guess often I know for myself and for other people in various situations, sometimes you're trying to puzzle through like your arguments. You're not necessarily saying at this juncture I may not need like an actual representation, but I need to make sure I am not completely off base with an argument I'm making. Again, is it that sometimes I think it's a little daunting when you have a question like that and you call and then you go through this whole process of we have to talk to your your person to make sure it's an elaborate, not too elaborate, it's kind of a process to get to just somebody to talk to about this stuff. Do you have any tips on just like just like help me out here, or you just be patient and go through the intake and just try to get someone that knows about your topic?
What I can suggest, these are all really important things, right? Like you just want consultation, right? And at its core, when people are calling our intake line, TRC, like it's our legal services arm. And one thing our advocates that pick up the phones aren't really well positioned to do is like provide legal advice. So if it's like, help me figure out what I should do, like for our intake advocates who aren't licensed attorneys, like that's almost a flag where they're like, wait a minute, I can give information. I can tell you how to file a complaint. I can tell you where to file a complaint. What I can't tell you necessarily is whether you should file a complaint or whether you should like do something else based on what you're telling me, right? So I think that's one just a framing thing, right? So, or if that's like if you're looking for what should I do, that's when those issues tend to get then routed to like an attorney or a practice group, some of whom and which may have capacity to do that kind of thought partnership. And frankly, like some of whom may not. I know personally within my team, I'm always trying to figure out ways that we can increase our capacity to just be good thought partners for people, to help them figure out what steps they should take, like what should I do? But to be frank, I think that's a gap in DRC's advocacy model, where you have a bunch of advocates that are really good at what they do, but are usually able to provide information. And we have a bunch of attorneys who are really good at what they do, but are usually like doing like the systems change bigger cases. And what you're saying is, I just want to noodle out my problem with somebody. Do you have anyone that does that? How can I get to that person?
Am I making a really crappy argument, or is this not worth it? Like, hopefully in some ways I feel like just being able to have those discussions could actually in the long run save you time.
Yeah.
But I think getting so good. Thank you, Will.
Yeah. And I would love to figure out, it might be helpful. I think Megan may have like been on these calls too in the past. And I think she has a much keener insight than I do, even because she works day to day, like doing the intake advocacy work. She's a supervisor in that program. And it might be worth having her come back on. I'd be happy to join her too. I'd have to ask her, but to work through some of this, like, how does it work? Like, how does it work when someone calls DRC? What can people really expect? And if they're looking for a certain type of, piece of advice, like, what's the best way to set that up so that people are actually getting what they need when they call?
Yeah. Thanks, Nina, and thanks, Will. I'm gonna go to a couple of questions here in the chat. Let's see, I think it was, who was it, Vanessa? Let me see. Oh no, it was Maribel. Okay, Maribel was saying, at RCRC, we suffer from a lack of translation during the annual POS. They did not offer translation to the community. We requested it but the RC said they didn't have it available. The community did not understand the information provided. So basically translation at these different meetings is not being offered. That's a problem. There's another one question, I guess it is from Jane, and she said, I'm sure DRC is inundated with more cases than there are resources. Do some cases have priority over others? Kind of what we were talking about just a minute ago. Is DRC primarily focused on systemic change cases?
That's a really good question. I'm going to talk about our federal programs because that's what I work in. I work in our federal programs, not OCRA. And every year, our federal programs at the beginning of the year put together what we call is an advocacy services plan or a statement of goals and priorities. And it's a document where we try to lay out, what our priorities are for the coming year, based on feedback that we get and are constantly getting from the community. And that document kind of lays out what are the areas that each of our practice group are going to focus on in the coming year. And so that's one thing that we look to, for example, in figuring out, like, is this the type of case that falls within our priority areas that we're going to take? And it might mean, it kind of depends on the year or two. Like right now, when we're litigating our race discrimination case against DDS, like we identified those types of issues as a priority. And now we have 3 attorneys that are working full time on that case. Cases end, right? So that means we're also doing fewer, I'll say, individual representation cases than I would like. But when that case ends, then maybe we'll be looking at another issue that the community has identified as important. And no one ever just jumps into a big class action case. Every big case starts with like working with people on their individual cases to help represent them and identify the barriers that they're facing. So then there are years where we'll be doing less systems representation and doing more individual cases. I know that may not be a satisfactory answer, but it's just, I think gives a sense of some of the dynamics. So there's yes, we have a document that identifies our priorities. I'd be happy to dig it up and share it. And then within that, sometimes we're doing big systemic change cases, and sometimes we're doing individual representation. It kind of depends on the year and kind of where things are in the life cycle of that issue.
Thanks, that helps a little bit. I'm gonna go to Lizette. We're gonna take you off mute and ask your question, Lizette.
Hi, thank you. My name is Lisette Gangora. I work for the Department of Public Social Services for Medi-Cal. And my son, Dylan, he's 14 years old. He's autistic and he is receiving services through the regional center, San Bernardino, IRC. I seen, by the way, my son is not on the DDS waiver. I seen at the county level so many cases of adults and children getting discontinued when they're not in the DDS waiver, but they're disabled. They have a qualification to receive services through the regional centers. So the question that I have for you, or not so much a question, but like an idea, maybe you should try to take in consideration to standardize all those type of cases as soon as they have a diagnostic to approve them for the DDS waiver automatically instead of being screened them for program A, program B to reach program C. I don't know if that makes sense. So they should be screened for the DDS waiver, straight to the DDS waiver, and that's it. So that way they don't lose benefits, because I have cases where they called or they go in person at the county, moms complaining that, oh, my son lost therapy because you discontinue him. But we have like something in the system that is letting us know that they're disabled and they're screened for the DDS waiver, so that way they don't lose eligibility in the county level. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks.
Lizette, thank you for that idea. I put my email address in the chat. I'd love to talk more or hear more about that. We could do a whole nother training on the DD waiver, but it's just the idea that it should be easier for people to be on the waiver. It helps people because it makes it easier for them to get services through Medi-Cal without having to pay a share of cost. It's better for our systems because it brings more federal money into our DD system. There are lots of reasons why I think it's a good idea to make it easier for people to be on the waiver and not harder. So I'd love to just hear more about your ideas and your experiences in working with people who are trying to access the waiver.
Thanks. Evelyn asked, said she would agree if we could standardize social rec services across the 21 regional centers. If we continue with disparities in a single service, how can we trust in all the services that regional centers should provide? You can count me in for feedback. So thank you for that. And then let's see, people are just really harping on this Zoom thing. So again, common sense, right? Okay, Catherine says, in our DDS standardization work, is there a conversation yet about standardizing across the state who gets into regional center. In my area, I see inequities about who gets into regional center based on which regional center catchment area an individual lives in. Is that true? Yikes.
That's a really good question. There is a conversation right now about standardization at the intake and assessment level. But my understanding is that it's mostly focused on timelines. For example, there were stories where someone starts the assessment process at one regional center, and they're, 50 days into the 120-day timeline. Then they move to a different catchment area, and they have to start over that timeline. And I think DDS is trying to crack down on things like that and bring some standardization into the timelines. I'm not aware of any efforts or talk when we're thinking about standardizing like how it works when you do the diagnostic and assessments. Like there are some regional centers that make people kind of prove that they should be eligible for regional center services before they'll even consider it, right? Like you have to come in with it in a gift box with a bow to get in the front door. There are other regional centers that might say, we understand that there may be reasons that you don't have all of your paperwork together, you don't have all the assessments you need. That's okay. Like we'll help. We'll do our own assessment. So there's deep inequities across regional centers about how they treat people at the intake level, about who gets to move on to that next step. And I think there's a lot of work our system has to do around making that process, how the assessment process works and who gets assessed, more equitable across the state. I don't think people are working on it now, but I think it's an area that's ripe for some work.
Yeah, and then Sylvia said, we need direct help. The support from local offices is not sufficient to overcome the obstacles that are imposed on us. Sheila said, these meetings are advocating for the disabled. Is it only, in specific in California residents? I think we answered that. Sorry, Sheila. Yeah, we're a California organization. So I think Ileana, put this through to you. Sorry, I'm messing up her name every time I say it. And then Carmen says, we need more Latinos to be included on the board that is creating the master plan. And I think this is Sylvia said, even when we receive support from the local offices, they block us. We need direct help. And Medalia said, Zoom is very important. Again, looking for more questions. Sorry. Griselda says, good afternoon, everyone. I would like to see direct help from DRC for families. If the regional centers want to see eyes on the client, families also want to see eyes on the regional center, at least direct help from families. DRC will be able to see the injustices and systemic barriers. Why don't they do it like that? And this was at 5:05. See the regional, at least direct help from families. DRC will be able to see. Well, I think, like you said, well, isn't when people fill out their request for assistance as their first intake forms, right? Even if you're not able to help the persons right there and then, and giving them referrals out or recommendations to look elsewhere or whatever, you're keeping that data, right? As far as what kind of calls are coming in.
Yeah, we're keeping that data so we can look at what kind of calls that are coming in. And that also helps us, think about what areas we should prioritize to advocate and prioritize in our own advocacy plan about the cases that we take on. It helps us figure out what types of things we want to say to DDS. For example, when we get calls, even if we're not able to represent people, but calls from people that are saying, my regional center is forcing me to have an in-person meeting. I can't do it, and I still have the right to a Zoom meeting. Then, we don't use the person's name or any of their confidential information, but it allows us to also say, DDS, like legislature, people are still being told that they have to do meetings in person. That's not what the law says. Like, we are hearing that from people in the community. So there are, there's still a number of ways that the issues that people surface through calling us can help our systems, even if we're not able to provide in the moment the type of representation that people want and need.
Mhm. I think in these last few minutes, thank you so much for all this time you've given us, Will, but in these last few minutes, I personally think it's important that we plant in your brain some points about this data collection issue, so that you can be ready and prepared when you go to your meetings on the 25th. And I put in there that I've said this to DDS last year as well, that and I think I told you the same story, but sorry. But there's all kinds of information that the data that's collected and services that are given for behavior plans and behavior programs and behavioral supports and behavior services, whatever you want to call it. And many of those reports come with the little attachment there saying that the person has communication, behavior is communicative. And yet, I don't think any of them, I don't know because we don't have data on it, have any remarks about getting communication support to those individuals. So that puts a behavior team in charge of communication, and they are not equipped to do that. So if they could at least collect data on what are these recommendations that are coming in, like you have these behavior ones, how many do have communication? I'm going to guess it's 0 to 10. But and then recognizing it, I mean, the data wouldn't necessarily recognize this, I don't think, but common sense, and everybody knows that people are writing down that behaviors are communicative. And so how come you don't have someone with the expertise of communication on that team, and then also support with funding that person to be on that team in a productive, healthy way? That's kind of my thing for communication. I think the other thing is
Darlene, is it okay if I interrupt and ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
It's been a while since I've done special education advocacy, but I remember that every IEP asks a question. It asks, does the student have behaviors that interfere with learning? And if the IEP team checks the box yes, then the school has an obligation to do like some kind of functional behavioral assessment, or it triggers an assessment process. So I guess I'd ask, and you don't have to answer, but is there a type of question that we may want to consider in the IPP around communication, but that kind of gets at a similar, like, does the person have communication support needs that stand in the way of inclusion? Or I don't know. I'm trying to think of some way to frame a question that would then lead to okay, now we need to look at support. I've been turning that over in my mind.
Well, I think, and feel free to put in the chat anything that anybody else is thinking too, or come online. But I think, the obvious would be, does this person able to effectively communicate? And if they're not, then that should start the wheels going. That, well, did they have an assessment? Is the equipment broken? Do they need trained persons with them? Like, where's the breakdown happening? So does this person we're having a meeting about, do they have effective communication? Now, some support persons and support teams might say, yeah, that's as much as he can talk, because they think they don't presume competence. But, and that's not going to safeguard that individual. But if there's anyone on that in that meeting or at that team saying, no, he wants to talk about other stuff and he doesn't have a voice, he doesn't have a machine, he doesn't have a device, he doesn't have a sign language interpreter, whatever the case may be. And he needs some support for that. So it would maybe lend an opportunity for someone to come forward and say no. And then they have to start the dominoes of how do we fix this, hopefully.
I mean, what you guys are just this back and forth here, to me, that should be a series of initial threshold questions in the IPP. you know, if you're talking about a new IPP template, like you don't get to go further until this is worked out because it's so foundational, so threshold. And that gets to my other question, you know, DRC, you guys have so much guidance about the IPP process and, you know, breaking that down and the rule and all that kind of stuff. I was wondering, and maybe this is not a good strategy, but have you given some thought to actually preparing what you think is like, we would love it. Like, this is something we could get behind if this were the standard IPP, like, and circulating it among your friends before, you know, the end of this, the period of DDS review of this. I mean, are you guys thinking about that? Like, what is the vision for like a really great IPP? To me, I know I can't in my son's regional center, and it's impossible to even get a sense of what it is because they truncate the process so much. What you get to sign isn't the real thing. There's some report that goes with it that you actually don't get your hands on, and it drives me crazy. So I don't know that there's any common understanding of what like the bottom line requirements are, but if anyone knows it, it's you guys. You have so much guidance on it. I think you should consider doing like, you know, a visionary template that maybe we could see and comment on or something.
Nina, good comment. So I think it's a couple of things. We are waiting like on pins and needles for DDS to release their template so we can take a look at it and identify what works well, but you know what it's missing too. Once we have that, I think we'll be in a good position to do some kind of, I'll call it sign-on letter from organizations, from people to say, this is the foundational things that need to go into an IPP document if you're going to call it in any way like person-centered. So there are things that we can look at, like how does it track against the federal person-centered planning requirements, right? That's a legal standard. There's thinking about like current trends, like what does it do? What is it talking about support decision-making? So there's another group of folks that we're talking to about like, shouldn't it say something about decision-making and how people can be supported to do that? So I think that DRC has a lot to say about what the legal standards might be. That's also different than like where the foundational things are important to people, like people with communication support needs, for example, like that the types of questions that should be asked in every document. So that's part of the reason why I really want to join this call, to hear also like the types of things that Darlene's talking about, how we think about like communication access questions in the IPP document. We'll have a lot to say, but you know, I don't think DRC, like, you know, we can't do this alone either.
Yeah. There's so many comments here. Well, we're not going to get through them all in 5 minutes. But I'm gonna ask Eric to make sure we save this chat, and then we'll put together just what people were asking and saying, and so that you have that in your head, because I really see you as a liaison person for us to be heard if we can be heard. But Tia at 522 had a good question, I think, that many people could benefit from if it exists. She said, saying, is there a public digital resource that summarizes the cases that your office is working on? She's an adult sibling of an individual doing a bit of onboarding of legal cases about communication rights for individuals with non-speaking to minimal speaking who use AAC. And she's wondering, is there some way that you guys share what you're working on?
Really good question. I'm going to drop a link in the chat that is a part of our website. That's a summary of the different, it could be cases, I'll call them higher level advocacy projects that our organization is working on, and it's separated out into different areas. So I'll drop that link in the chat. It may not have everything, but I think it'll have a whole lot that people can really dig into to better understand the work that we do.
Perfect, thank you. Also know that Griselda was saying that Well, let's see what she's saying. You know very well that interrogators have access to the needs of the families, and up until now, I have not seen school districts taking charge of communication from the beginning of AAC. Yeah, schools is a whole nother place that we have many conversations here at CAC about. And getting access to, and of course, just putting in there, and I don't know if this can go in the data, but I hear this all the time in our meetings, is the ridiculous amount of hoops that have to go through for assessments. With the denials and the assessments and then, you know, and can somebody else pay for this first, which I get that they're last payee, but if it's already been stated in an IEP, do you need to go get another letter to say so? Can you just take the information that we have and use that rather than making somebody go back and make another official request for a piece of paper and then bring it to them? That's just extends things out so long. So yeah. Okay, so we have, so just make that a mental note, Will, please. I want to say thank you so much for joining us. I could sit and talk to you for a long, long time. And I'm sure everybody in the group here would love that honored as well, because it's so nice to be able to get your voice out there. And I know you are always a great listener and are looking for a way to get things resolved. So I really appreciate that about you. I want to say thank you to Will Del Rosario and Tim and Nina and Eric for helping and working on today's project as well. Next, for those of you who are involved in our LCC, our, oh gosh, language connection learning. Leadership.
Collect.
Pick an L word. Leadership.
Too many letters.
Too many.
Yeah.
Leadership connection. Our meeting will be Thursday. And so if you are involved in thank you, Gilda, Leadership Community Connect, which I probably helped make up, but I can't hold it in my head. Meeting is Thursday at 4 p.m. here on Zoom for those of you that are involved in our leadership community and Self-Advocate Speakers Bureau. So join us for that. And then next month will be May, and we will have our next topic on, I believe it's May 12th or 16th. Somebody help me. Eric, do you know what it is? I can't remember. I want to say it's the 12th.
Ooh.
No? Not the 12th?
I think it's May 18th, maybe.
1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, May 21st. Is that right? May 21st.
Oh,
Oh yeah. Okay, May 21st. Yep. Okay. So thank you. Yeah, so join us on May 21st for our next CAC meeting. We'll come up with Tim and I have got bunch of ideas going on here. And we'll put it to work and get it to the team and get it out there to you. So thank you. April's been a big month. Keep advocating. Join on April 25th if you can. I think that would be a good thing. Thank you. Oh, and thank you to Lorna and your team, to our translators. You guys worked hard today. Thanks. We appreciate you. All right, goodbye.